Hello, in this video I want to have a look at San Francisco, and it'll be very much a follow-on from some recent uploads I have regarding Sydney and the New South Wales area here in Australia, and especially to do with the Oddfellows and these same themes reoccurring, same people, organisations. But I'll include a link in the description. If you haven't seen Secrets in Plain Sight by Scott Onstott, highly recommended. I'm going to include a link to the San Francisco episode because there'll be information that will carry on and connect very much to this. So it's that'll be in the description. Very much worth watching. It'll add dimensions to this as well. Lots of San Francisco is very much an esoteric town, and these the Golden Gate Bridge being one of these iconic structures that continues with this same pattern as well. Now, in Secrets in Plain Sight, he touches on the Coit Tower and some other features here in San Francisco. I want to extend that information, but also link it to some other sites and other parts of San Francisco history, and bring them together. And as recent uploads here from Sydney, especially to do with Oddfellow connections, and not as much known as known talked about as the Masons, but very much in the same vein, very much the same history and origins. This is the Neptune Society columbarium, so it's where you put all the ashes in those little niches in the grave, and the columbarium is on the Oddfellows cemetery, what was the Oddfellows cemetery, and that's the first connection. But on its own, it's not too much. But we're going to extend this and have a look further. But very nice building connected to the City Beautiful movement as well, which is an important point. We'll get on that soon enough. But for instance, the ground floor, there are 8 rooms, and they're named after the 8 mythical wind. Boreas, it being the north wind, for instance, being one of the most many people would have heard about, or even the word Zephyr is origin from there. Now, on the first floor, there are the rooms are named after the zodiac, and that's one of these recurring themes will be to do with especially with precession, so the 12 signs of the zodiac, but also connects to the great year. For instance, at 64-foot diameter on the SI scale, on the Doric scale, and Doric is an ancient measure, but I'll examine that a little bit later in this video, but we'll see. But for instance, 72 years per degree of precession, each age being 2,160 years. So astronomy, music, geometry and arithmetic will be recurring connections. And so on the standard, the common, the so-called modern scale, we also get 256 and 192 in regards to tuning and music. But we'll also find, for instance, the ancient cultures spread across the world kept using the same particular set of numbers and proportions, and another example of it being here, for instance, Mayan long count, and the other parts of their calendar will also be extended in the other videos. But in regards to, so that's time, ancient time, and that will extend even further. But the platonic solids such as the tetrahedron and the cube are also descriptions that fit very much with the dimensions of this building. And as we'll see, all these structures across San Francisco, as other previous videos regarding Australia, have exactly the same thing happening, but 2,160, so 2,160 miles diameter of the earth, 2,160 years per age of precession. Walls of New Jerusalem, 216 feet. It's in the Vesica. Also, the compass has 2,160 minutes. Sorry, 21,600 and 21,600 nautical miles is the equatorial circumference of the Earth. Sun, Earth and Moon and stars will be a recurring underlying theme. They would fall under the banner of geometry, but also across various ancient measure scales as well. So 72 or 720 league, the diameter of the Moon, but this will extend into the Ionic, the Longfoot scale, as well as the Sun, and as well as 72, 720 or 7,200, all being very important in regards to geometry, especially what's termed sacred geometry, the vesica, the pentagon, the pentagram, or the tetrahedron, but also the golden number. So cosine 72 degrees is pi over 2, and the hexagon, of course. Weights and measures. So room temperature is defined at 72 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 295.3. That's an important one, a very, very important one. Byzantine equal temperament tuning 72, ancient Greco-Roman weight scale. So 1 sextula is the equivalent of 72 grains, while even in computing and resolution 720p. So ancient and modern, and completing the computer age, but also, 72% is like a healthy person. That's a percentage of water at rest. A heartbeat will on average be 72 beats per minute. As in regards to the Mayan count, but also the yugas, so the ancient Hindu Indian beliefs as well. So the yuga will break down into 72,000, 720,000, and then 72,000 years. Again, the entry, the middle, and the exit point. Across Western mysticism, including the Bible, such as King Solomon, 72 demons, depending on how you count them, 72 books in the Catholic Bible, Jesus sending out 72 disciples, as mentioned in Luke 10, and in Kabbalist tradition, 72 names of God, but also in the Eastern as well. So Sun Wukong in Journey to the West, 72 transformations. Confucius also had 72 disciples, and the number of postures in Shaolin, martial arts as well. This, of course, Western, Eastern, but also in the Americas, but going in ancient Egypt, it's one of these key ones as well. For instance, when Osiris was murdered by Set, well, there were 72 accomplices, but Thoth or Hermes, the Hermetic Code, it comes from Thoth. Every 72nd day was one for the moon. So also have a number, perigee. The moon, when it gets the closest point to the Earth, will be 0.0024 AU, astronomical unit, the average distance from Earth to the Sun, and this is very, very important. Number of knuckles in regards to why do we count by 12s, 24, 24 letters in the Greek alphabet, the diameter of the Earth in the long scale at, could go on quite some, but again, geometry and astronomy also. So for instance, 180 degrees defines any triangle. Once more, in the Vesica, you'll find these descriptions, and also in the Ionic, and as well as the long scale, it will describe the moon. While 60, for instance, 60 minutes per hour, 60 seconds per minute, per degree on the compass, 6 being such a beautiful number. Also, again, the Vesica, the size of the Earth on the long scale, which goes back to the stone circles in the UK. Underlying all of this will be a common and a repeated reference to Sun, Earth, and Moon, and also the stars. But in regards to measuring time, in regards to agriculture, every aspect of our life is regulated by the Sun and the Moon, and of course the Earth upon which we reside. This is why it's so important. This is why it's repeated across cultures. You can't, if you don't consider the Sun and the Moon and the stars as well for time counts or for navigation, it's essential. It's the core of our human existence. It's every animal on the Earth relies on Sun, Earth, and Moon for their cycles, including the stars. But the Oddfellows Cemetery, the Columbarium, now we're going to go to Oddfellows Hall on 7th and 26th, I think, but in San Francisco. The old Oddfellows Hall was destroyed in the 1906 earthquake. San Francisco was rebuilt and redesigned after that, and we'll touch on that, the people who redesigned it. The Oddfellows have very similar symbols and methods and aims in regard to Masons, Templars, Rosicrucians, and other. But here we see the Oddfellows Lodge, Oddfellows Hall in San Francisco, and the CVS pharmacy underneath. This is a very important reference to the Oddfellows because, for instance, here in Australia, the South Australian Oddfellows began and still operate the national pharmacy chain. One of the points of the early Oddfellow lodges in Australia, Canada, etc. was to have a doctor and a pharmacist employed by the lodge to provide members with these types of benefits and services. So in the days of snake oil salesmen, before pharmacy or medical regulations were around to protect people against these snake oil merchants. And you'll actually find that, especially Oddfellows, but others too, were actually key in the beginnings of the first regulation and of pharmacy, medical services, of medical research before it was taken over by, let's just say, big corporate interest people such as the Rockefellers. That's not a contrivance of conspiracy theory. It's a traceable fact. It's just sort of been covered up a bit. Interesting. So in California, in Los Angeles, now there were pharmacy chains that had been taken over by Walgreens, for instance, but Oddfellows Road in Los Angeles as well. That's one of the legacies of these pharmacy, and in California, but sticking with San Francisco. In Scott Onstott's presentation, Secrets in Plain Sight, he mentions the curious nature and some of the geometry and stuff regarding Coit Tower. And, well, so Manchester Unity building in Melbourne, Australia, Manchester Unity Independent Order of Oddfellows. That's the Oddfellows building. It's at from 1932. I think it's almost the same year that Coit Tower was built, which for 1932 was a very important year for some reason. Garden Palace in Sydney, which was burned down, but James Barnet was the architect for that, and he's been in Australia. All of his buildings have this very secrets in plain sight, to use the term, within their buildings, and they share one very important thing, that they're all 210 feet high. Secrets are written in weights and measures. Now, just like the sun and the moon, weights and measures is a fundamental, in the sciences, in a fair society. For instance, people cheats on their weights and measures in the marketplace, or suppliers, etc. It makes for an unjust society. This is a Egyptian Book of the Dead, the Bible, Code of Hammurabi speak very often, very strongly about the importance of honesty in weights and measures. 210 feet is 7,560 grain. That 756,000 Egyptian royal miles describes the sun. 2,520 inches, 252,000 stadia, as described by Eratosthenes, which is a whole bunch of other cool stuff in there, describes the polar radius of the Earth. Now, a definition of a stadia varies depending on which one you use. Some are very accurate, some are superbly accurate. 252 will also bring us back to references to the Pentagon as well, and as we'll see, the Pentagon, especially in regards to the golden number, and this being an essential, in an underlying thing in all these designs. Both those numbers will also, for instance, a Great Pyramid. Now, I won't go into the details of it because there's a little bit of a 0.001% discrepancy, but 756 feet or 252 yards. So, but okay, so 12.727272 will also give us a description of the proportions of a pyramid, which is essentially the square root of phi. And we'll see, has this, earlier videos, it's in all the structures. It's that they use this particular method, and one of the reasons for this number is not just because of the Great Pyramid being very much an astronomical textbook, written in stone for the ages. But a key point, so 210 feet converts to the Cremona scale. Now, Cremona is virtually unknown. You have to really go back into old books, 1800s, to find it mentioned, but that's relevant because especially the older buildings here in Sydney were built at that time. So they would have known about these measures, and now it's fallen out. But it's essentially, so 6 Cremona feet equals 7 English or 7 modern, if you go to buy a ruler, 12 inches, that's your modern scale. But on the Cremona scale, we also get the same series, these harmonics, these unity points, sun, earth, moon, and the stars, weights and measures, the dodecahedron, the apocryphary's weight converts to grams. Now, grams and meters are an ancient system. It's in no doubt of in regards to the measurement of time in the pyramid. The meter is ancient, but also 2,880 fingers, 288 key number at basically the heart of all this geometry, weights and measures. So again, the sun, but it'll bring us to the pentagon. It's a most perfect number across the 4 dimensions, the Mayan count, but also D 288 hertz, which sort of begins to finish off the sequence that begun with the columbarium. I covered 72 and 216 in the columbarium, so 540 will bring us again to the pentagon. And we'll touch on some of the others. So you might see I skip some of these numbers. That's because they're already being covered, or I will cover them in the next structure or the previous one. 12. So why do we have 12 apostles, 12-person jury, 12 people on a board? Because it's very important. It will connect to 12 constellations in the zodiac, 12 months per year, 12 being also referenced in geometry, and a key at weights and measures and time. For instance, 60 is divisible by 12. 12 is at the heart of the empirical system. But okay, so 10,909, well, that's just a shifted decimal point. Multiply the diameter of the sun by 109.0909, above 99%. We get the distance from the sun to the earth. Multiply the diameter of the earth by that same number, and you get the solar diameter. It's beautiful how they connect. Now, we could also use 108. That works too, but this one you'll find is actually much more accurate and fits with the most accurate modern sort of measurements on this. But measuring the sun's it's like trying to measure the gas giants. There's always a little bit of variance in there because the sun swells and it's hard to define the surface. There's no clear definition between surface and atmosphere. So you're always going to have like a fraction off, because it's not just margin of error, it's also margin of definition, which would be very important. 2.277, well, again, we'll see this repeated, but the Great Pyramid has these same proportions, which also define the differences between the sun and the earth. Now, earlier I mentioned 72 Fahrenheit being 2953 Kelvin. Well, that's one of our first hints there. And so Coit Tower was at the Samian scale, and we'll get to that soon, because we have to really show how they all join together, because it's not just on the Coit Tower. So from the Coit Tower, now we're going to have a look at the Transamerica Pyramid, and so there it is there. You can see the Coit Tower in the background to the right, and you might notice there's like the streets forming that V there. So you have Columbus, and I think it's Telegraph Avenue on the other side, but at least it's leading off to Telegraph Hill, upon which the Coit Tower. Now, after the earthquake, Danile Burnham, City Beautiful movement, I've done a few videos in regards to him. He was redesigned the streets of San Francisco, but Chicago and so many other places. Did a lot of work redesigning Washington, the Washington Mall, for instance. The redesign was his work. Now, he defined that all streets in San Francisco should be 66 feet. The same things here in Sydney. You'll also find it in Canada. Now, the immediate thing will be, well, that was a standard. Well, actually, no. Going back to the early colonial period, we had street widths. Every city had its own measures, and some began with 66, but then later they were standardized down to 66, including up until the early 20th century. So 66 feet was not a standard for city design. It was reintroduced later in many places. But okay, 66 is 792 inches. You're going to find sun, earth, moon and stars. Now, even according to the best available data we have at the moment, because measuring the movement of the sun around the galactic core is, well, it's trying to look outside of the box from the inside, but the best available measures gives a 66 million year cycle at 792,000 kilometers an hour. 66 and 792, as we'll see. The weight of the Earth, the size of the Earth in the long scale, the ancient Ionic, the ancient long scale as well, and the definition of the standard, supposedly, allegedly modern mile, and even the mass of the Earth, 66, will come together. But also, so the speed of the Earth around the Sun at the slowest point, 66,000 miles per hour, while on the ionic scale, 792 million ionic fathom being the diameter of the Earth, diameter of the Sun. But also you'll find 7,920,000 ionic cubits have given us the definition of the diameter of the Moon. Ionic, ancient scale, canonical cubits, also one of these. We'll touch on that later, but also say 66 will also define the Moon on the canonical cubit, which is essentially 6/5 cubed feet. So 1.728 feet is one canonical cubit. The streets of Sydney, the streets of Chicago, the streets all across Canada, New Zealand, and all across Australia actually use this same method, and it was brought in sometimes at the beginning, but across the world, especially in the early 20th century, there was a movement to bring this back to 66 feet as a standard, or 132 for highways, and that was very much connected to a specific set of architects and very much connected to the occult, Oddfellows, Freemasons, Rosicrucians, more and more. So your streets are defined by using not just the standard modern scale, but also by using ancient scales. Will bring us back to Sun, Earth, and Moon, as well as New Jerusalem, which is effectively a definition, a redefinition of the Ark of Utnapishtim from the Epic of Gilgamesh, going back to the beginnings of recorded history, ancient Egypt, Sumer, and the Indus. This is where it began. The numbers and the measures in their temples is conclusive of that. The establishment really needs to catch up with it. But so 66 feet wide road will have usually the 42 foot wide carriageway, giving us a 7:11 proportion. So 11 over 7 is pi over 2, so 22 over 7 is as good as pi as you'll use in the real world. Not talking theoretical paper, but for engineers, people working in the human scale. 7 over 11 is pi over 2, but also it's also, again, I showed earlier, this is also the basic two-dimensional design of the Great Pyramid of Egypt, but Giza, the Great Pyramid, but also it will give us proportions of the golden number. So 1.272727 is effectively the square root of pi, and we also and we also see proportions of phi. Albrecht Dürer, Melancholia 1, one of the most famous, enigmatic, most studied esoteric pieces of artwork still to this day, has these proportions which fit so well with that. The Louvre Pyramid by I.M. Pei. I.M. Pei is one of these rock star architects like Norman Foster, and I'll get to him at the end, which are still using this ancient system, but they very much play up this thing that they're computeristic and modern. No, they're working with compass and straight edge and ancient methods, and they keep repeating it, and it's in the measures, it's in the proportions. Again, it's undeniable. It's just very uncomfortable because the paradigm that we have established for ourselves and our world, and these intellectual heroes that get promoted by the gatekeepers, when you scratch the surface, you find that they're hermeticists, or they're copying the work of the hermeticists and sort of trying to sell it as if they're got some magical skill or something like that, and people worship at the altar of these people, which I think is, given that they actively go out of their way to hide this fact, and because when they're questioned on it, they get upset and they deny it and they storm out of the interview. They know it, I know it, you know it now. That's what they're doing. This is about Sun, Earth, and Moon and ancient systems. Again, that the roads of 66 feet will also bring us to the proportions of the Earth and the Moon, and that scale is also another wonderful harmony. But Danile Burnham, he designed streets of San Francisco. He created this, especially from Columbus and up to the Coit Tower, 40 degrees. So a nonagon, a nine-sided poly, the Ennead, the nine guides of Egypt. The Enneagram is and especially to do with Gurdjieff and other. Now it's a whole big topic. I won't go into that, but we break down each of those degrees into a 360-degree compass. And why 360? Well, again, it's a much older than commonly given credit for, and it's very much filled with information. All these time, the clock and the compass is filled with occult information, and it's again will always be pointing us to the sun, the earth, and the moon. Interestingly, like 13,200 minutes, weights and measures. In the old days, 13,200 fish was the standard measure. It was called one last. You'll find that if you get it, you can get your hands on an older book, old encyclopedia. Go straight to the weights and measures conversions, and you're going to find these numbers I'm showing here. You're going to find them built into whether it's measurements of beer, wine, butter, fish, the measurements of cloth. Each industry would have its own measurement, and it's just wonderful how they all connect, and they're written in sacred geometry. It's measurable, it's undeniable, and well, as we saw, even 792 on the design in regards to the degrees of defining a nonagon will bring us back to the 66 feet, or the Gunther's chain, or a surveyor's chain as it's called, and 792, Sun, Earth, Moon, and New Jerusalem, or the Temple of Man. Sun, Earth, Moon, and Man, effectively. 220 feet is the deck height on the Golden Gate Bridge, and I'll get to that at the end, but just as a quick example to see. So we break down all the divisions of the Golden Gate Bridge. You see how these same, not just one, not just two, they all come back to one another. This is why it's to me it's clear. I've put up I don't know how many hours now just in Sydney, but also if you go to London, Washington, New York, the most important buildings that they spend trillions of dollars on. These cities such as Astana, Brasilia, Washington, and Canberra might be called the New Jerusalem cities. Now we're going to go into detail on Transamerica Tower. It also fits the pattern, and 144 is one of these special numbers. Okay, so we have the sun and the moon. 1440 minutes per day, the time on Earth, so Sun, Earth, and Moon, ancient weights and measure scales, modern screen resolution. Once again, you will find, it's going to extend quite a bit because as we see again, the nonagon, but also the hexagon and the vesica. Or the vesica, the vessel of the fish, vesica piscis, vesica pisces, was the original Christian symbol, still used openly in churches, but it's in all the great cathedrals as well. So before the cross, and actually the cross is defined within that. You can create the cross quite easily. Platonic solids, so the octahedron, but also the addition of all the angles of the Platonic solids. And even Plato's number, as we'll see, joins in here. Plato, Pythagoras, the academies that they were teaching from were passing this on, amongst other things. 144, the golden number, because it's a Fibonacci. It's the 12th Fibonacci, and it's also 12 squared, but also 3 to the first, plus 4 to the second, plus 5 to the third. Add that 6 to the fourth as well, and it gives you this wonderful crossover. All these other numbers will fit in this four-dimensional sort of number matrix where I've shown how it connects together through binomial theorem. Rosicrucians, both on their music scale, and also they have a belief that there are 144 elements available in the universe. New Jerusalem, the wall height of New Jerusalem, 216 feet or 144 cubits. 12 tribes of Israel with 12,000 each one. New Jerusalem being 12,000 furlong cubed. So the surface area will bring us to 144, or the total edge length will bring us to 144 again. It's essential across. You'll just find it in churches everywhere, modern ones, ancient ones too. It's one of these things hidden in plain sight, and it goes back to much older texts such as the Ark of Utnapishtim. Once again, the flood myth, which the Noah's flood is a retelling of the Ark of Utnapishtim down to the raven and the crow, the number of the days, and it connects wonderfully to the Manu and the Hindu flood story. Mayan long count, the Yugas as well. So I mentioned 1.728 feet is a canonical cubit. The volume of New Jerusalem is 1728,000. but also 144 is the breakdown of that particular yuga. So 144,000 years entry, then you have the middle part, and then you end with 144,000 years. Screenshot from Secrets in Plain Sight. You look at your standard reference. So if you go to Wikipedia first page search, which you should never do to study these things, you need to go deeper, find the best. But for instance, on July 4, the glass pyramidion is illuminated, and the true height of it is 864 feet. You'll find other references saying it's shorter than that, but they're not including the top part of it. So on the standard scale, 31,104, the years of Brahma in Eastern tradition. The troy ounce, when they talk about gold ounce, they're talking about the troy ounce, 480 grains or 31.104 grams. Also, it connects with apothecary's weight, which is the old pharmacy or alchemist's weight, is a way to think about it. As we move down, so the Royal Babylonian scale, the Mohenjo-Daro foot, these are some of the oldest measure scales, and they happen to harmonize sun and moon on these these Pythagorean or harmonic numbers as they're called. 3,456. Interesting point, 3 times 4 times 5 times 6 equals 360, but that's something else. Or you add them together, you get 18. 1 plus 8 is 9. It's a Hashad number effectively. But also gives us the radiuses of Sun, Earth and Moon again across multiple measure scales. The great year of the precession of the equinoxes, 25,920 years, the same numbers again on the Doric, ancient Greek scale. Also the Royal Babylonian scale, we have the same number appearing, Sun, Earth, Moon and stars. Mayan long count, so 1152 span. Again, these all the breakdowns of a Mayan long count, the Hindu calendar. So, for instance, the Yuga here, 864 feet, 864,000 years into the Dvapara Yuga. 864,000 miles defines the sun. 864,000 seconds defines the outside of the Vesica. Royal Babylonian cubits, 86,400 seconds per day. The New Jerusalem and the Ark of Utnapishtim, once again, the measures and the descriptions of there come back to the same set of numbers, while 864 feet, 576 cubits, 24 squared. Again, the Mayan count. Screen resolution, so gamers might be, 576. 5 plus 7 plus 6 is 18. Once again, it's a Hashad number. And on the Longfoot scale. Now, tracing boards and these other emblems used in esoteric references. Now, I'm using Mason ones because they're most accessible, easy to get, but not that they're harder to get, but they're more common. Now, we have 3 columns on a tracing board. The Greek orders of architecture, the Doric, the Ionic and the Corinthian. That's even the order that they were created in. So got some columns here around Sydney just to explain. So your Doric is your male column. It's a column of strength. It's the most simplest form. The column of wisdom is the Ionic, which represents the woman. Those curls at the top are sort of represent the curls of a woman's hair. And then you have the Corinthian column, the column of beauty, which represents the virgin. A woman's beauty is simple, where the Corinthian, almost like imagine it like the hair design is much more elaborate, and so and also women, the Ionic is between strength and beauty. Wisdom is between strength and beauty, but also it's a musical scale. The Dorian and the Ionian music scales, but it's also a measure scale. So Mark Wilson-Jones did excellent work on that. He's decoded the Salamis stone, which is an ancient conversion tool from Doric, Ionic, as well as Samian feet. But for example, the Parthenon, the columns there, 48 feet or 144 hand on the common scale. The foot is at least as old as the Salamis stone and the Parthenon. It's actually older than that, but without a doubt, it can be confirmed there. Just the establishment hasn't quite caught up on these things because they're going to have to rewrite all their books. So 864 feet on the Doric scale. There we can see how it breaks down into these proportions. Now the octagon 135 degrees is the defining angle, and 1080 degrees. So just like 180 degrees defines a triangle, 1080 degrees defines the octagon, which is again very important in geometry terms. Now, again, because I've covered some other numbers in earlier ones, so we'll just be skipping through some quickly, but the ratio of mass between the Earth and the Moon is 81 to 1. Peter Plichka, in his book, The Little Book of Coincidences, very awesome read that. He also points out that the ratio of speed, so the Moon is 81 times faster because as the Earth goes around the Sun, the Moon goes around the Earth. So they're moving at the same speed around the Sun, so to speak, but because the Moon is orbiting the Earth, it's moving faster, and it's moving 81 times faster. I haven't verified that myself, but so it might be. But anyway, I'm pretty confident because all his other work seem to be pretty much spot on. So the Doric, now if we look at the ionic conversions and the numbers, and so we see them compared there. Now you'll also find how at these certain points they tie up very nicely in regards to certain aspects of it. But on the ionic scale, the numbers are sort of worth covering. Also, for instance, 3,600 palm, 3,600 seconds per hour. The same thing happens with the compass, the 360 degree compass, 360 days on the Mayan count, and 36 000 yards on the ancient Longfoot scale, which again from Stonehenge, and that particular part of the world is 36 again. Now the same, so platonic solids, icosahedron, 3,600 degrees. A circle or a square or a rectangle will be defined by 360 degrees, triangle 180, octagon 1080. The vesica will break down into 3,600 minutes, 36 degrees defining the sharp point of a pentagon, and on 36 degrees cosine in trigonometry will bring us the golden number. It's a triangular number, so effectively it's a Tetractys number or a Pythagorean number in that way, but it's also because of the beauty of the number 6. You'll also see, as you can see there, across dimensions, multiplying or dividing this 1, 2, 3, just like 1 plus 2 plus 3 equals 6, 1 times 2 times 3 equals 6. That's why 6 is such a lovely number in that way. Sticking with the pentagon now, if we do a comparison, you see how they all come together? Like everything complements itself in this system. So if one or two things tie up, well, that's just a coincidence. But one or two things could tie up with one or two things, and then you start adding these things up, and it's just impossible for it not to be worthwhile. And again, anyway. So again, we're going to find that both Ionic and Doric as well as Royal Babylonian, other ones we've seen, the ancient Indus scale, Sun, Earth, and Moon, harmonizing at these very specific points which connect to the clock and the compass and the navigation and natural cycles of time, as well as allegedly man-made cycles of time. That's a long philosophical debate. Okay, interesting point. As Scott Onstop pointed out, the Pyramidion cap is illuminated on July 4. Independence Day is celebrated on July 4, even though it was declared on July 2nd. Why July 4? Well, it's Sun, Earth, and Moon, and we're going to have a look at that now, because on July 4, the Earth is at closest to the Sun, so perihelion, the elliptical orbit. July 4, that's when the Earth and the Sun are at the closest point. Now, very, very, very interesting set of connections here, because, for instance, that's 94.5 million years. So 94.5 million miles is the distance when at perihelion. This will bring us to an exquisite set of connections in regards to the Transamerica Pyramid, the Transamerica Corporation, and the Bank of America, which was once called the Bank of Italy, which very much had its beginnings in San Francisco. The diameter of a moon is 945 Egyptian royal miles, or 1,080 miles. So the modern mile and the Egyptian mile is in the Royal Mile of Scotland. You could as well. So if you've been to Edinburgh, you walked the Royal Mile, you've walked an Egyptian Royal Mile. My oh my, see how that connects to the Doric and the Ionic scale as well. So, well, maybe, okay, that's coincidental because the tracing board, sun, earth, moon and stars being fundamental repeated elements of this. But Amagio Giannini, founder of the Bank of Italy, later to become the Bank of America, also founder of the Trans-America Corporation, was a holding company. The Bank of America building in New York City, 55 floors. Coincidentally, it's another one of it. Now that whole building's full of it, but to the top of the building, not including the spire, and that's important too. That's 945 feet. 945 feet, as on the previously mentioned Cremona scale, is 1,008 span. 945, 1,080. 1,080 span defines the Transamerica Tower, perihelion, the sun, the earth and the moon coming together. If you include the spire on the Bank of America building in New York, 1440 inches. Sun, earth and moon. So this will be repeated over and over again, whether it's here in Australia, Sydney, Melbourne, Perth, Brisbane, Washington, Denver, Winnipeg in Canada, in Toronto, and sun, earth, moon, all the stars too, and it's include the clock and the compass, navigation, which okay, so it still carries on, and we can link it back. So you see where Coit Tower is in regards to the Transamerica Pyramid, Transamerica Tower. Well, 864 feet, and the long scale breaks down into 2727, 109. As shown earlier, the streets being 66 feet gives us this proportion 7/11, which also gives us proportions which defines the Earth and the Moon. And as we saw in Coit Tower, it's just a simple matter of shifting the decimal points, as we'll see. It just like with that perihelion thing and the scales of measurement, and the building in New York, the building in San Francisco, Coit Tower being all these buildings in Australia as well, being so. But for instance, Coit Tower 109.9, just to shift a decimal point, we get the relationship of the sun to the earth and the distance from the sun to the earth, coming to these numbers, and that 2727 gives us the proportion of size, as well as many other things in regards to earth and moon. San Francisco, these cities are just massive temples to sun, earth and moon. It's fully occult, fully esoteric. There's no other way to put it. But so 864 feet, that's twice of the Civic building, or the Masonic Centre building here in Sydney, which converts beautifully to the canonical cube at 500 feet. So even when it's in decimals, you might think, and all these long decimal strings, there's massive amounts of information there. It's not coincidence. It's just not. It's about esoteric occult knowledge being passed down from the ancient times. Now, we've done Transamerica Tower, Coit Tower, Oddfellows Hall, the Neptune Hall. Now we're going to have a look at the Golden Gate Bridge, that is. Actually, before we go to the Golden Gate, I want to have a look at City Hall there. So you see short distance, basically halfway between Oddfellows Hall and the Neptune Society Columbarium, or the old Oddfellows Cemetery. The key public buildings are all, they always have this. I'm not cherry picking some building here because it fits my design. I'm taking the very important, the central buildings of each of these cities, and that's where you'll find it. And so, for instance, there are Corinthian, Ionic, all this other architecture in there. A lovely connection is the statue at the front here, but the dome width amongst that, I'm going to revisit this at the end because it connects very strongly, but 112 feet. 112 pounds, or the imperial hundredweight. It's one of weights and measures will always be a key. You're going to find that these weights and measures from the olden days have massive amounts of information. Now, 112 chakras, given the statue there in Eastern tradition, Again, the Vesica Pisces is a lovely description of 112. The 112 cogs in the labyrinth at Chartres and here in Sydney as well, at Centennial Park, for instance, which is a connection. Also, the in Alchemy of Geber, 112 elements, but 112 feet is 295.3125 Samian hands. The Samian, or Samos, Pythagoras of Samos, was mentioned earlier in the Salamis stone and how these conversion points. But back to Coit Tower, 210 feet, Samian fingers, 2,953.125. Sydney Town Hall, where the Masons here have big meetings, 29.53125 Doric fathoms. Recently, I did an episode on Oddfellows and Temperance and other societies in Newcastle in Sydney. Customs House by James Barnet, 293125 on the Doric scale as well. Previous to that, talking about Centennial Park, and as I just mentioned, just touched on Centennial Park and has that labyrinth, 112 cogs. Well, the columns there, which come from the museum building designed by James Barnet, 29.53. I wouldn't be surprised if I were 125 feet, but either way. Retouching on it, so 72 degrees Fahrenheit is the definition of room temperature, 293.7 Kelvin. Now, shift that just a fraction, and what do you get? You get exactly that same number, but it's close enough in description as well, so 2953. That's key because it's got to do with Sun, Earth and Moon again, and the synodic month. So one orbit of the Moon around the Earth takes 29.53 days, give or take a fraction, because the things don't work in perfect circles. So it also will include 29.53125 days. The orbit of the Earth around the orbit of the Moon around the Earth in relation to the Sun. Sun, Earth and Moon, once more. So that's 29.53 days. I mentioned earlier the proportions of Sun, Earth and Moon, how they tie in with your system so well. Multiply the diameter of the Earth by 29.53 or 29.53125. You get the distance from the Earth to the Moon. Weights and measures, ancient scales, ancient beliefs, ancient understanding. It, like even the bluntest knife in the drawer, has to understand the importance of the Sun and the Moon in Earth and the way they affect the way it affects all our natural cycles, fertility, agriculture, everything. It's a key. It's not pagan. It's defined by nature. It's divine. Now we need to consider, we'll have a look at the Golden Gate Bridge. So we've been through a number of these other sites, some that have been mentioned, discussed in other presentations, other researchers, but now I want to have a look at the Golden Gate Bridge and take a little bit further using the same method, the same pattern, which exists all across the world, modern world, but again it does extend back to ancient times as shown in ancient measure systems and how they connect to this. So for instance, the deck width and the deck length, so 1,080 inches wide or 10,800 cremona span long, the main span there. 108, well in geometry it's going to come up quite a bit, be quite important, because for instance the fundamental at the basis of all so-called sacred geometry is the vesica piscis, but also your 30, 60, 90 degree set square includes this. Now it's a awesome number in the way that it will connect to the golden ratio. 108 degrees defines the pentagram, which gives us fire. Also across dimensions, it's a very, very cool number, always coming back to these same sets. And so, well, as I touched on earlier, the octagon, and as well, so also we can see how the pentagon and the pentagram, how 108 degrees connects with there. And of course, through trig, we also get the golden number. Also, like one that I've touched on earlier videos and gone through, and the use of, well, how 37, 73 and 55. So 55 is equidistant between 73 and 37, which are primes, just like in mirror, it's the positions and the numbers, but also 108 brings us that geometry, while in astronomy 108 is again just keeps reappearing and reappearing. So for instance, from Venus to the Sun we have 108 million kilometres. Of how the modern metric compares with this is also a very important point, well, diameter of the moon. Well, again, 108, the long foot scale. Now, one long foot, 1.056 feet. Divide that by 2, you get 0.528 for those who, 528, you should pick that up. Diameter of the moon times 100 is the distance from the Earth to the moon. Just like in 29.53, diameter of the Earth times 29.53 gives us the distance from the Earth to the moon. 108 also works for the moon, and 108 being a defining number of the moon. Even the radius of the moon, 1,080 miles. The Earth orbits the Sun. At the slower point, it is 66,000 miles per hour. At the faster point, it is 108,000 kilometers an hour, which ties in lovely with the, as we'll see in a second, with Venus. But so the tantric breaths, 10,800 per day, 10,800 per night. That's, well, in the day and the night, the circumference of the Earth in nautical miles, 21,600 in total, but day or night, 10,800 nautical miles. The speed of the Earth, 10,800 nautical miles, 10,800 speed of the Earth, 108,000 kilometers an hour. The polar diameter of Saturn is 108,000 kilometers an hour. Also, the tilt of Saturn and Jupiter very much connect with this, but also we'll have cycles of time, especially in regards to Mars. So roughly every 3.5 years, Earth and Mars will align, but there's a 108-year cycle where they'll align at perigee, at their closest point to the Sun. Like I will mention July 4 and perihelion. We'll have a very lovely tie-in with that. The Sun and Earth being the closest point on July 4, but also this 108-year cycle. So, for instance, we just have a quick review there. We see how just with Sun, Earth, and Moon and in Saturn, the graphic would be too confusing to have it, but it's one of these key points, not just in in man-made measures, but also in cycles of time, which is a stronger confirmation. In systems of measure, full HD 1080, the yardstick measures of liquid, measures of volume, 108, going again back to older times, but going to ancient times, and the Middle Ages, but even again back to ancient Greek and Rome, the 108 grains being a defining point for weights and measures, so in coins, but even the land values, all this, including like the Byzantine period. But it's 108 Hindus, Buddhists, Jains. It's at the core of their systems and their belief. Even, for instance, yoga, 108 sun salutations on the equinox. Again, this how all this come to be. There's no other way to imply it. They had a system of knowledge back in those times, and it exists in the modern texts up till the mid 1800s as well. But in China, so Sun Wukong, 108. 10,800 li, Qin dynasty, the 10,800 li you must walk 10,800 li to achieve wisdom. But also in Chinese literature, but also so in Buddhism as well, you'll see it. Buddha asked 108 questions, 108 statements when he died. There was 108 auspicious symbols on each of his feet. The number of offerings, the number of ringings of bell, it just goes throughout. But going back to, well, the Epic of Gilgamesh, they very clearly describe the amount of oil, the amount of pitch, the amount of bitumen that was used, 10,800 again. So across cultures, across time, it knows no ends. But another repeating theme, so we've had geometry and the compass, but also the clock, so cycles of time. Now even that ties up nicely, which is so often the case in all these other structures. Well, for instance, 168 hours per week, 24 hours per day, 1440 minutes per day. So the way that the clock and the compass, the weights and the measures all come in beautifully together on these grand pieces of architecture. This is not just some shed in some backwoods that just happen to have the numbers and I'm picking on. These are the major pieces of infrastructure, the major public buildings, even their location, the orientation of the streets, the width of the streets, it all comes together. And we'll also have a main span, 1,200 and 192 or 1296, sorry, but Cremona grain. Earth and the moon across scales of measure, the compass, 1,296 minutes, seconds in the compass, platonic numbers, even the yugas as well. Again, in the Americas, in Asia, in Europe, you'll find it just repeated over and over. The Golden Gates, so many worth considering, but we'll just I'll only touch on some because I've repeated some. So for instance, you'll see at 54 feet the base, 216, 864 I've mentioned earlier, but so 162 hasn't come up, and that's also in the Doric scale in furlong. That'll also describe the moon. While the base of each pylon, 54 by 33 feet. I've done so much on 33, so I'll just won't rattle off on that, but it's very esoteric, it's very occult. It's especially in Freemasons and others, but 33 feet. The breakdown will give us all in the long scale, which is that ancient stone circles, one of the units of measures there. But it also connects us in Ionic, the ancient Greek system of measure, to give us definitions of the moon. So we've had sun, earth, moon, geometry, astronomy at the core, including the other ones would also have musical connections as well through weights and measures, but touched on it in an earlier piece of this video. But for instance, the deck height, 220 feet, that's 2,640 inches, and well, the Earth diameter, 2,640 league, 1 league being 3 miles, but also the Ionic and the long scale will connect there, just a couple of extra zeros on the end, shifted the decimal point, and we have multiple scales of measures, ancient scales of measures tying in with modern architecture and modern measure systems to give us harmony points between Earth, Sun, Moon and stars. But also 220 feet is 7,920 grains. Well, the Earth diameter, 7,920 miles, one league being a mile, but also on the Ionic we have the Sun and the Moon. We also have New Jerusalem, or what could be called the Temple of Man, ties in beautifully. 12,000 furlongs is 79240 feet. Even the speed of the Earth the speed of the solar system, 792,000 kilometers an hour around the galactic core. Even the speed of how it moves up and down all ties in lovely with this, and all the previous over Columbarium, Transamerica Tower, they all fit into the same set of numbers here is on the Golden Gate Bridge, and just strengthening and confirming that the pattern exists not just in San Francisco but across the world. There's one last site I want to have a look at in this video about San Francisco, and that's the Ocean-Wide Center. It's currently under construction. It's going to be a new skyscraper tower there, and as soon as I saw it, and I saw it was by Norman Foster, I knew it would have this Hermetic Code in it, because Herman Foster architecture always includes this. He's like a rock star architect of the moment, but he was also the chief architect for the town design, city design, but also many of the major buildings in Kazakhstan, the capital city of Astana, which is the newest of the New Jerusalems. Washington, Canberra and Brasilia are the same thing. I've done a couple of videos on these cities, but let's begin. So firstly, as with all his architecture, hidden in plain sight, perfect line for that, because even this geometry in there leads us to, points us towards the vesica and this underlying very important geometry, which has very important mathematical connections. But so Astana, it's overloaded with the symbols, the measures, the golden number, and really all the important numbers of Sun, Earth and Moon, and especially in regards to the Hermetic Code, geometry, astronomy, arithmetic and music. So anyway, I've repeated these cards, but that doesn't matter. So anyway, it's to begin with, the ocean-wide center has a focus on this geometry. Now, because of the angle, it's a little bit off there, but you get the picture. But 910 feet, so that's 2,730 span, or 10,920. Now, for instance, the Khan Shati Entertainment Center in Kazakhstan, 27.272727. Now that there is a direct connection to earlier structures here in San Francisco, and this will connect. But for instance, also Baderek Tower, essentially the Washington Monument of Astana, with the sun sphere at the top. Now you can see the height there. So 273 and 1092 being the underlying points in there. Now, just to remove any idea of coincidence, because also so at the other end of the alignment we have the Kazakh Ally Monument, and again in the medieval royal scale we have the same number appearing, 2731092. These are hugely important, beautiful numbers in regards to harmonies of sun, earth, moon and stars, and we'll have a look at that. But okay, let's say begin. The ocean-wide center, 10,920 inches. Well, that's the equatorial diameter of the moon in kilometers. If you do a first page wiki search, you'll get 10,921, but there's a whole thing about bulging and stuff, so above 99.999%, so you know it's as good as any other measurement. But what's also beautiful about these numbers, 273 or 1092, well, for instance, the circumference of the moon we dealt with. Okay, so the circumference of the sun will be between 27300 miles. Okay, so again, because of the problems of measuring the sun, defining its surface, it's within that band. But another important point, the moon is 400 times closer to the earth than is the sun, but the sun is 400 times bigger. The moon is 27.3% the size of the earth, and that's another important one. But anyway, 400, so scales of size, 400 times 27.3%, we get 1092. 109.2 times the diameter of the sun is a distance from the sun to the earth. Alternatively, the diameter of the earth times 109.2 will give us the distance from the earth to the sun. So how these numbers interrelate, sun, earth and moon, and how these scales come together, it's no small thing. It's a beautiful harmony, and actually this particular system is the reason for the solar eclipse. So the moon perfectly covers the sun during the eclipse, and because of that we could see the corona. Because of that we were able to work out basically what's the mechanism by which the sun is operating, nuclear fusion. So much of our sciences was able to grow out from that fact, and if it wasn't the case we might be technologically decades or maybe centuries back from where we are presently. And this is only really the tip. So earlier I talked about the synodic month. Okay, before I forget to include it, so just in case you think this might just be a one-off, well, it's 273 feet between Grove and McAllister Streets, the area of Fort with the San Francisco City Hall. So it's not just a modern coincidence by Norman Foster and a repeated coincidence at that and across all his other structures around the world. Again, he's one of these very important rock star architects of the moment. But in regards to the synodic month, which I mentioned earlier, we'll just have a quick look at that, because how many of these structures were at 2953? So it's synodic month is a relationship of the sun, the earth and the moon. One orbit of the moon around the earth in relation to the sun, and that happens every 29.53 days, plus or minus a small gap because of elliptical orbits, of course. However, that's a cycle of time. That's a cycle of time defined by nature, not by man. So, but also 29.53 times the Earth diameter gives us the distance from the Earth to the Moon. So Sun, Earth and Moon, cycles of time and proportions of distance, which are very important, very key. However, this does not end, because Sun, Earth, Moon and stars, and here we have the sidereal month, which is one orbit of the Moon around the Earth in relation to a fixed star. That's every 27.3 days, and the Moon is 27.3% the size of the Earth. Natural cycles of time, natural proportions of these bodies. So yeah, and sidereal month is about the star, the Earth, and the Moon. 27.3 days, 27.3% the size. So between these 2 months, we are describing and these sets of numbers 29.53, 27.3. But there's another lovely connection here. So on the left hand side, we have the synodic. On the right hand side, we have the sidereal. So there are 12.369 on average. Again, it's a little bit either way depending on per year. Sidereal 13.369 plus 1. 12.369 plus 1. Now, pardon, I made a bit of a boo-boo in the graphics. You might pick it up, but the information's still good. So the moon in the sidereal month orbits the Earth every 27.3 days. Again, with this very small margin. But the moon orbits on its axis once every 27.3 days. Synchronous orbit and synchronous rotation, which in itself is not uncommon. That can be found in many other moons. But the importance of that is that that's the reason why the man on the moon, as we in the West call it, other cultures describe it differently, but he's always facing the Earth. This is one of those synchronous harmonies, beautiful harmony, very much in the same vein of the total solar eclipse. But anyway, sidereal month is 27.3. But during that each sidereal month, on average, the Earth will move through 26.9 degrees of the solar arc. So, effectively 27 degrees of the 360-degree orbit around the Sun. However, because of the elliptical nature of things, again, the Earth will move through 27.3 degrees of the solar arc during that period. So 27.3% the size of the Earth. Every 27.3 days it orbits the Earth in relation to a star. Every 27.3 days the moon, one moon day or one rotation of a moon on its axis. And this is the tip of the iceberg. There's much more, but just as an idea, we start to get the symphony. Now, the gradient, the 400-degree compass, the metric compass, which never really took off, that'll also lead us to 33, but that's another thing. So, the ratio of size, Moon to Earth, we have this 27.3, very much as described in the pyramid. The graphics I used earlier had 27.2. 7272727. That's using the ideal measurements. I've done a couple videos in regards to this on the pyramid. It actually does extend out to 2273. But apogee, so the maximum the distance from the Earth to the Moon in the elliptical orbit, 0.002. Sorry, yeah. But that will extend to 0.00273 AU in that cycle. But that, again, it doesn't end here. It keeps going on. Now, the moon doesn't orbit around the center of the Earth. There's a play between the Earth and the moon, and it orbits around what's called the barycenter, which is 27.3% below the surface of the Earth, or 5,000 kilometers. Back to phi again. So now we start to, as you add these up and put them together, you start to see that, apart from the synchronous orbit, which is not unusual, as we have observed in moons as we can observe around other planets, but the proportions of size, proportions of distance, always coming to this number is unique to the Earth. It's there's something to it, but it doesn't end there, because the asteroid belt is 2.73 AU, 1 AU astronomical unit, average distance from the Sun to the Earth, which connects wonderfully with Bode's law, but also in series is 27.3% the size of a moon, and it's at 2.73 AU. Mercury and Venus as well will have this same 0.273 AU gap between them as we move around. So just like the moon, just a shifted decimal point. Well, same with Mercury, same with Venus, same with the asteroid belt. There is something to this, okay, but it keeps going on, and so the length of the day isn't static. It's not exactly 24 hours. It does flex in and out, and it does move on a cycle, and that day it's a 27.3 day cycle. but also atmospheric tides. Now, there are plenty of studies that have been done into this. If you research it, you'll find I'm not just pulling this out of nowhere. There are peer-reviewed studies regarding this, but they're all individual and separate. But atmospheric tides, 27.3 days. The Schumann resonance and the lightning at the equator. So as lightning hits the Earth rings like a bell, and that connects with the Schumann resonance, but also 27.3 day cycle. Now, of course, it extends to the sun. So, as with sun, Earth, Moon, and stars, now sunspots are the richest part of where you find sunspots, 27.3 degrees north or south of the equator. The heliospheric current rotation, of course, is also on a 27.3 day rotation, because one of the bands on the moon, so one day on the sun, one rotation of the sun is 27.3 days. Human reproduction cycle, 27.3 days from fertilization, menstrual cycles on the 28th day, or every 27.3 day. The sidereal month could be called the feminine month, as where the synodic could be called the masculine, but that's something else. But also, it doesn't. So the density of the sun to the sun and the Earth, 27.3%, you might say again. Surface gravity has the same ratio, just again shifted decimal points, 273 to 1, and because of the leeway in the margin of error in these measurements, etc. But anyway, the volume of the sun, 1,273,000, as we saw earlier, 1.273, and in the architecture, including the Great Pyramid. Even so, as the best estimates at the moment, the internal temperature of the sun is 273,000 Fahrenheit. Now, the surface temperature of the sun plus the surface temperature of the Earth at the equator, the average, is a ratio of 1 to 273. Now again, as best available information and within this slight margin of error within these measurements, we also have 27.3%, so elements heavier than hydrogen. They are very sure about the temperature in space, because it's not an absolute vacuum, so it's at 2.73 Kelvin, which is very nice. But the rings of Saturn, now that's up for definition, but the tilt of Saturn is 27.3 degrees, something we saw earlier in the Sun, in the Earth, in the orbit of the Moon, around the Earth in sidereal month. Now, the circumference of Jupiter, because it's essentially 1/10 the size of a Moon, 273,000 miles. Now, the Sun will be 2,730,000 miles within this acceptable margins of error and margins of definition. Saturn, so Uranus will also have will connect beautifully to this, but again. Now, if that's not enough, Avogadro's constant. So how many atoms per pound, or per ounce or per kilo, as they use? 2.73. Charles's law, again, in physics and chemistry, this is hiding underneath. And in regard, anyway, so as gas expands, 1/273, which comes directly to the speed of sound and temperature. The temperature will affect the speed of sound, and how do you work it out? 273 again. It's 273 is a sphenic number. It's also a number within the Fibonacci sequence. So, for instance, 13 times 21 will give us the area of that particular rectangle. For instance, here would be one example. So the area of the Fibonacci rectangles includes 273. So again, all these things, phi, temperature, the clock, and the compass, all come back to one another. Draw a circle, and with a square inside it, the ratio of area is 27.3%. The circle being larger, the square being larger than the circle. Now, Gaussian blur, that's how they blur images with computers. Also, the best way to de-blur images, including images blurred by other methods. 273 seems to be the essential of that. Now, earlier I talked about the sun being 273 times hotter than the Earth. Look at the temperature scale. 0 C, 273 Kelvin. absolute zero, minus 273. Now, even on the Fahrenheit scale, you'll notice, you just look at the beautiful connections there, especially in regards to the harmony point of negative 40, both on C and Fahrenheit. 233 is a Fibonacci number. It's between 144 and 377. 144 and 377 being constants, but 108 is often used as the to reference the relationship of Sun, Earth, and Moon in regards to diameters and distance. It is an excellent rule of thumb, but 109.2 works much better. And again, 109.2, so 27.3 times 4, which is also, well, the Sun is 400 times larger than the Moon is 400 times closer. Earlier graphics sort of dealt with that, but it does tie back together. So 108 is a great number in regards to this point, but 109.2 is the better example. And so, for instance, here we can see how that works, because it also will include the lunar circumference in kilometers, but the Moon being 27.3% the size of the Earth, 27, or the Sun 400 times larger than the Moon 400 times closer, yet 273 will also describe the solar circumference as well, by definition, because of the lunar circumference. But interestingly enough, it's in miles there as well. So this is like the gift that keeps on giving, and it's one of the things that Brian Cox and the standard made for public consumption astronomy documentaries they won't touch this, because it's so harmful to the existing paradigm. They'll rather present you. Now, sometimes I'll mention the harmony of the clips at 400 to 400 ratio, but they really won't examine it any further. I even saw an interview with Brian Cox, and when this was brought up, he almost went apoplectic. It's a coincidence. It's a coincidence. That seems the mantra of that. But as above, so below. That's the point of this architecture. It includes the ancient structures, especially the Great Pyramid, and why it's being repeated across the modern world by architects such as I.M. Pei, Norman Foster. Now, here's another little graphic I made up in regards to this. Now, there's some beautiful connections here in regards to the pentagram and fire, but that's another thing. San Francisco, just like Sydney, it's hidden in plain sight. I'll put the link to Scott Onstott's piece on San Francisco as well. But even in the public art installations, now this is the old Mint building in San Francisco. Again, it touches back to something else I've been repeating about in Sydney, is the use of, well, especially to do with these public lamps and the acanthus leaf, as well as the use of the swastika and the meander pattern which goes around it. Again, this predates World War II, predates the Nazi Party, so don't be scared off by that. This is a very ancient symbol as well. Many things around San Francisco. Okay, so there we can see the Transamerica Pyramid in the background. In regards to music, it also includes what's an Aeolian harp. So it's stretching these metal strings, and when the wind blows through, it creates this very curious sound as well. San Francisco is very much filled with this, as I've shown with these structures, as well as other more well-known. And so, well, if you saw the Ionian harp, you just think, well, that's just, it's just a piece of public art. It's interesting. But when you start to connect these things with all these other buildings historically as well, going back to find that the architects such as Norman Foster, but also Danile Burnham, who did the city plan and some other key bits and pieces around the city, how his influence extended across America, Chicago, Denver, and, well, New York, also in Washington especially, and how so it's you have the same people, the same system of measurement, using it to encode this very specific, very same set of numbers over and over again, very in the modern common scale, but also very much in the ancient scales, and how these ancient scales, these ancient systems of geometry, astronomy, arithmetic, and music, the Hermetic Code, always come back together. Always. Many hours on Sydney. I've gone into videos on Washington, Denver, places in Canada, Paris, included London, but with a focus on my city here in Sydney, and how this Absolutely not. Absolutely not. It is not a coincidence. This is part of a ancient plan which has been carried on throughout time. It can be measured, it can be observed, you can use a historical evidence for organisations such as Freemasons, Oddfellows, Templars, Rosicrucians, and look at their influence, especially if you in Los Angeles and even in San Francisco, just like in Sydney, these groups are very prevalent and they've been around for some time. They have some very important real estate and important buildings, as well as the members being very important people in public service, politics, and other areas. The way that they've contributed to the growth of each one of these cities, each one of these nations, and again, ancient Eastern traditions from China to India, through to the Middle East, North Africa, across Europe as well, but not to exclude the Americas, because the Mayans were not only using these numbers in their long count, and you might sort of say, well, that sort of fits in, but it doesn't necessarily connect. Well, I've done a couple of videos and I've shown how the ancient Mayan temples were also, for instance, 66 feet, just like the street width here in San Francisco and Australia and across America and Canada as well, but also the use of 108 or 108 feet, especially, just as so many stone circles and other ancient monuments across the ancient world, across cultures, again tie into this. Without a doubt, you're going to dig a hole to China if you try and pull this apart, because coincidence, it's the war cry of the fool when it comes to this. That these all come together, especially in regards to weights and measures. That's at the core of the materialist world, and it seems to be mostly the materialist philosophy doesn't like this. They refuse to accept that there are all these hints of these pre-flood, antediluvian evidence, while the groups who, such as Freemasons, Oddfellows, and etc., are all very much of the antediluvian tradition. They're not shy about the fact that this was passed down from an older civilization. And, well, again, I think I mentioned it earlier here, in the last 200 years, basically, has been the big leap in sciences. So within a couple generations, we've gone from horse-drawn carts to landing on the moon. There is no that it could have happened in the past. Well, it could have. For instance, there was some cool docos have been made in regards to, I think it was like one called Earth After Man, which showed how if we were to undergo some sort of catastrophe or plague and we were to disappear from the face of the earth, within a very short time there would be no evidence of our existence. Everything we've achieved would be like dust in the wind. It would disappear in no time. So you could imagine that in 1,000 years' time from now, that there would be nothing left, or maybe 2,000. Anyway, in a short time after our civilization has gone, there would be nothing left of it. And very much I think that this particular knowledge and these particular organisations, for various reasons, have had to use secrecy, have had to use this particular method to pass on the knowledge through time. Now, that's not to say that all of them do it for malevolent reasons. There is a certain element of not all of them use it for benevolent reasons. There is a certain element of benevolence running through this, because the same method can be used for self-enrichment, and that's unfortunately the way that so much of it has turned into. Now is the time for this to be public, and for us as a civilization to start thinking about the legacy we leave, and to lose the materialism that we have now. And that's why I think materialism is so dangerous, because it's very short-term thinking, it's very narrow thinking, it's very selfish and greedy thinking, and this we have a sort of opinion of ourselves now that we've reached the pinnacle, and that what come before was somehow savage and uncivilized, and nothing could be further from the truth. We have devolved into the most we live at a time when we have so much access to to resources, to information, to all of the important things, and yet it's become a cult of celebrity, a cult of enrichment, a cult of what I can extract from civilization rather than what I can give back to it. And so, just like the earlier secret societies were about giving back to society, about making a better world, the secrecy has now become a thing about how I can look after only my own, and how do I make myself famous? How do I enrich myself rather than enrich the greater community? And so, just like the model of the earlier temperance and Oddfellows and these types of organisations who were involved in good works for the public, I think we need to return to that. And not only that, to also has the previous civilizations passed down their knowledge in stone and written in such a way that it will be passed on for the ages. They went to great expense and sacrifice to do these things, the Great Pyramid being a perfect example of it. And the civilization that built it is long gone. I don't hold with the notion of it being 4,500 years old, and that it's being there's a lot of evidence for that. But even that aside, even if it was built according to the official history, it was still done with such sacrifice. There is no signature on the Great Pyramid to say, it's not a palace. It's not about one man's ego, or it's about passing on these perfect proportions and this perfect knowledge, and that knowledge very much being in the Hermetic tradition, or the Hermetic Code of as above, so below. And as you've seen with San Francisco, it's about reflecting what's in the heavens and putting that down onto earth, and those perfect harmonies, and about building things in a harmonious way, in a unity way, rather than the modern materialist scientist, which is about separation of specialities. You're a chemist, you're a musician, you're an astronomer, you're a geometer. No, what we have to do is start thinking about how all these things fit together, and about one school of knowledge, not separate schools of knowledge. We don't need separation. What we need is unity, and that comes through sun, earth and moon being some of the prime examples of it. As above, so below. What is in the heavens, we should reflect on the earth. When we do something, we should do it with a concept of beauty and sacrifice, and leaving a legacy for the future. This is not just about beautiful or clever or tricky architecture and showing off with numbers or intellect. It's about what will you do for tomorrow, as to steal a phrase from the movie Gladiator. What we do in life echoes in eternity, and I think that's a very important and profound question that we need to address. Who am I? Where do I come from? Why am I here? And what am I here for? And anyway, with that, I'll leave it. Hope you enjoyed, and have a good one.
Ooh.